Hi everybody, the Mature Simmer here. So welcome to another episode of the Non-Aviation Flight Sim series. So this episode we're going to talk about cruise, or what's really usually the longest section of a flight, of any duration. Short flights not necessarily, but anything where you're probably going, say, 250 miles or more. Cruise may be the longest segment of your flight. Certainly beyond that, the longer it is, the longer you'll be there. You heard as the video started, my autopilot set altitude. That means I'm within 1,000 feet of my cruising height, which is 25,000. We're now going to be settling into that. We were climbing up for a little bit. So what you need to do as you're transitioning from climb to cruise is you do need to keep an eye on your speed. I don't want to redline the plane if I can avoid it. That could, cause airframe damage and things like that. But as you transition from climbing to going forward, you may have to slow your engines down a little bit because you may suddenly start to gain some speed. So we're slowly gaining speed here, but I'm not seeing this indicator showing that it's substantial. So for now, I'm going to leave it alone. But as we talk, we'll keep an eye on it. I may need to push that back a little bit because we obviously are speeding up. If I start to hit 300, I'm probably going to go ahead and do something about that and basically put the throttle back a little bit. Cruise is usually the altitude in your flight plan that you've gone ahead and filed with air traffic control and let them know this is what you're going to do. I'm traveling to the east here at this point, and so in the US, typically traveling to the east, and I think actually globally this applies, but you're normally then flying at a odd altitude. So that is why we're at 25,000 versus 24,000 or 26,000. If we were flying in a westerly direction, we would be at an even altitude. And that basically just keeps separation in the skies between aircraft. An aircraft going in the same direction would then obviously be separated by 2,000 feet. Aircraft going in opposite directions would be separated by at least 1,000 feet. This allows air traffic to go ahead and keep separation and so forth. So we're speeding up a bit. I'm just going to crank the throttle down just a smidge and see if that will stabilize me here. Because once again, if I can maintain that speed, you can see now I'm slowing down. So it didn't quite work. You can keep playing the game a little bit. I'm using an Xbox controller, so I'm pressing a button. If you've got like a HOTAS stick or anything like that, which are things that you would use for flight simming, you'd have a potential, a throttle on there that you could use that would give you some more fine-grained control. I don't necessarily have that, so it's pretty common for me to, in this kind of aircraft, have a situation where I'm never quite able to get it to fly at speed, and so you're playing with the throttle a little bit all the time because this plane doesn't have the autopilot doesn't control the throttle in this plane like it does in an airliner, so it's a little harder to dial that in with the control mechanisms I have available to me. But in this case, regardless of aircraft, whether you're in a prop plane where you don't have autopilot and you don't have things, you would just play with your trim and you'd get yourself flying straight and level. We talked about trim a little bit in the pattern video, but basically what you're doing when you're trimming the aircraft is you're just basically trying to avoid having to apply pressure to the yoke all the time, because as you might imagine on a long flight, that can get very, very tiring, and it's not as helpful to do. Like, the last thing you want is a tired pilot in case something happens and they can't react appropriately because they're worn out. But your goal is basically stay at speed, level out at the altitude you're going to go, and that is what cruise is about, is basically getting the plane to a point where it will cruise along at a speed and an altitude that you choose. You get that set, and if you've got something like this, like autopilot, there's not much for you to do as a pilot other than just make sure something doesn't come up. Maybe plan ahead to your next phase, which will be descent. You want to know when you're going to need to descend, and so forth. But with that, I'm going to wrap this up. That explains cruise for you. Pretty simple. If you got any questions that I haven't covered or any more detail, let me know. I'll be happy to answer them. If you've enjoyed this but haven't dropped a like, please consider that. And if you are not yet a subscriber and haven't done that, please consider that as well. I will see you next time.